Her desperate millionaire, on the verge of losing everything, lies down on the train tracks. In the final seconds, a little beggar girl appears and does something unexpected. Her action not only saves him, but changes his destiny forever. What happens? Next is unbelievable. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The bitter winter wind howled through the empty train station, carrying with it the weight of Alexander Sterling's shattered dreams. His expensive Italian suit, now wrinkled and stained, did little to shield him from the biting cold. Just months ago, he had been one of New York's most prominent investment bankers, with a corner office overlooking Central Park and a portfolio worth millions. Now he lay on the cold metal rails, his mind clouded by a dangerous mixture of expensive, whiskey and crushing despair. The last few months played through his mind like a tragic film: the shocking discovery of his company's bankruptcy, the betrayal of his wife Catherine, who left him for his business partner, and the devastating loss of his beloved mother, the only person who had ever truly loved him unconditionally. The memories swirled in his head, each one more painful than the last. His mother's final unanswered call haunted him the most. He had been in the middle of what he thought was the most important meeting of his life, discussing a merger that would have made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. When her name flashed across his phone screen, he had dismissed it without a second thought. "I'll call her back later," he had told himself, but later never came, and now that simple decision would torment him forever. The distant rumble of an approaching train sent vibrations through the rails beneath him. Alexander closed his eyes, accepting what he believed to be his fate. The sound grew louder, the ground trembling more intensely with each passing second. In these final moments, he thought about the empire he had built and lost, the relationships he had sacrificed in pursuit of wealth, and the mother whose love he had taken for granted. But destiny had other plans. Just as the train's headlights illuminated the darkness around him, a small but surprisingly strong hand grabbed his collar and yanked him off the tracks with unexpected force. The rush of the passing train sent his expensive coat fluttering wildly, and he found himself sprawled on the platform, gasping for air. When his vision finally cleared, Alexander found himself staring into the stern face of a young girl, no more than 12 years old. Her clothes were worn and patched, her dark hair wild and unkempt, but her eyes held a wisdom far beyond her years. She stood over him, hands on her hips, with an expression that seemed to judge his entire existence. "You were about to do something really stupid," she stated matter-of-factly, her voice carrying a strength that belied her small stature. Alexander could only stare at her, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Why would this child, who clearly had so little, risk her own life to save his? The question burned in his mind as he studied her face, searching for answers in her unwavering gaze. "Why?" he finally managed to croak out, his voice hoarse and broken. The girl's expression softened slightly, though the intensity in her eyes remained. "Because," she said, extending her small hand toward him, "everybody deserves a second chance. Even rich guys in fancy suits who think they've lost everything." Her words cut through his alcohol-induced haze like a knife, striking something deep within his soul. Here was this child, who probably knew more about true hardship than he ever had, offering him not just salvation but wisdom. The irony was not lost on him. With trembling fingers, Alexander reached out and took her hand. As she helped him to his feet, he felt something shift inside him, a small spark of hope in the darkness that had consumed his life. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this chance encounter with a mysterious young girl on a cold train platform, would change the course of his life forever. The girl, who introduced herself simply as Sarah, led Alexander through a maze of narrow streets in a part of the city he had never bothered to notice before. The neon signs and towering skyscrapers of his former life gave way to modest buildings and small family-owned shops closing for the night. His expensive leather shoes, which had once carried him confidently through corporate boardrooms, now stumbled over cracked sidewalks and uneven pavement. After what seemed like an eternity of walking in silence, They arrived at a small, well-maintained house that stood out from its more weathered neighbors. A warm light glowed from within and the small front garden, though dormant in the winter, cold, showed signs of careful tending. Sarah pushed open the gate with familiar ease and motioned for Alexander to follow. Before they could reach the front door, it swung open to reveal an elderly couple. The woman, with silver hair neatly tied, back and kind eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward first. Her husband stood slightly behind her, his weathered face a map of years lived fully, his stance protective but not unwelcoming. "Sarah," the woman said, her voice carrying equal measures of relief and mild reproach, "you know better than to be out this late." Her eyes then shifted to Alexander, taking in his disheveled appearance with a mix of concern and careful assessment. "He needed help, Mrs. Rose," Sarah explained simply, as if bringing home a distraught millionaire was a perfectly normal occurrence. "He was going to do something foolish." Mrs. Rose's expression softened as she studied Alexander more carefully. "Well," she said after a moment, "you'd better both come in then. It's much too cold to be standing out here, and you look like you could use a hot cup of tea." The interior of the house was modest, but immaculately kept, with furniture that spoke of years of care rather than luxury. Family photos lined the walls, and the scent of fresh-baked bread lingered in the air. It was everything Alexander's modernist penthouse hadn't been: warm, lived in, alive. "You can stay," Mrs. Rose announced as she set a steaming cup of tea in front of him at the kitchen table. "But there are rules here. Everyone contributes, everyone helps. We may not have much, but we share what we have and we work to make things better." Alexander wrapped his hands around the warm cup, feeling oddly comforted by its simple ceramic surface, after years of drinking from fine bone china. I don't know how to do anything useful," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "I've never had to." "Then it's time you learned." Mr. Rose spoke for the first time, his voice gruff but not unkind. "There's dignity in all work, young man, whether it's pushing papers in a fancy office or sweeping floors in a humble home." Sarah, who had been quietly observing from her perch on a kitchen stool, nodded in agreement. "Mrs. Rose taught me how to cook," she offered. "I couldn't even boil water when I first came here." As Alexander sipped his tea and listened to the family talk, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. Here, in this simple kitchen with these kind strangers, his designer watch and custom-tailored suit meant nothing. Here he was just a man who needed help, and these people were willing to give it without asking for anything in return, except his willingness to try. But as the evening wore on, and the warmth of acceptance began to wrap around him like a comfortable blanket, Alexander remained unaware of the dark forces that had orchestrated his downfall. In the shadows of the city he had left behind, secrets lurked, secrets that would soon threaten not just his newfound peace, but the lives of everyone who had shown him kindness. The first rays of dawn crept through the modest curtains of Alexander's small room, a far cry from the automated blackout blinds of his penthouse. His first night in the Rose household had been spent on a narrow but comfortable bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of a home actually lived in, the gentle creak of settling wood, the distant hum of a refrigerator, the soft whispers of early risers. As he lay there, his mind drifted to his mother's brownstone with its warm kitchen and the constant aroma of fresh coffee. She had tried to maintain that homey atmosphere even as his success had pushed her to upgrade appliances and accept improvements he insisted on funding. Now, in this humble setting, he realized how little those improvements had actually mattered. A knock on his door interrupted his reverie. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, Sarah's voice called out. "And Mrs. Rose says to tell you that idle hands make for heavy hearts." Alexander found himself smiling despite everything. The girl's matter-of-fact delivery of what was clearly one of Mrs. Rose's favorite sayings reminded him of how his mother used to quote proverbs at him. He got up, dressed in the simple clothes Mr. Rose had lent him, clothes that probably cost less than the socks he'd been wearing yesterday, and made his way to the kitchen. The day that followed was unlike any Alexander had ever experienced. Mrs. Rose put him to work immediately, starting with the dishes from breakfast. His first attempt at washing plates resulted in more water on himself than in the sink, earning him a quiet chuckle from Sarah, who sat doing her homework at the kitchen table. "You're holding the sponge wrong," she offered, not looking up from her math problems. It's not a pen signing million-dollar contracts. By mid-morning, his hands were raw from unaccustomed work. But something else was happening. His mind was quieting. The constant cycle of regret and self-recrimination that had plagued him for months was being replaced by simple, immediate challenges. Learning to fold sheets with hospital corners under Mrs. Rose's patient instruction, figuring out how to hold a broom effectively, understanding the proper way to sort laundry. During lunch break, while enjoying sandwiches that tasted better than any five-star restaurant meal he could remember, Alexander noticed something about Sarah that he hadn't before. When she thought no one was watching, her confident facade slipped slightly, revealing moments of profound sadness in her young eyes. He recognized that look. It was the same one he'd seen in his own reflection countless times lately. "How long?" "Have you been with the Roses?" he asked her carefully. When Mrs. Rose stepped out to tend to her small herb garden, Sarah paused, considering whether to answer. 8 months, she finally said. "They took me in after." She trailed off, her expression closing like a door being shut. "They're good people. They help people who need it." Before Alexander could probe further, Mr. Rose appeared with news that would begin to unravel the mystery of Alexander's downfall. "There's something you should see," the older man said, holding up the evening newspaper. The headline made Alexander's blood run cold. "Sterling Industries' former CFO found with suspicious offshore accounts." The article detailed how Thomas Wright, Alexander's most trusted financial officer, had been discovered maintaining a complex web of hidden accounts. But what caught Alexander's attention was a small detail near the end of the piece. A mention of regular payments to a private care facility, the same one where his mother had spent her final days. His hands trembled as he read the article again. The dates of the payments aligned perfectly with his mother's rapid decline. Something wasn't right. The careful facade of coincidence that had surrounded his professional and personal collapse was beginning to show cracks. "Mr. Rose," Alexander said slowly, "I think I need to make some calls." The older man nodded gravely. "Use the phone in my study. And Alexander," he added as he turned to leave, "be careful. Sometimes when you start pulling threads, the whole sweater comes apart." What neither of them noticed was Sarah standing in the doorway, her face pale. She slipped away silently, her small hands clutching a worn notebook to her chest. A notebook that contained secrets that would soon turn Alexander's world upside down once again. The study was a small room lined with well-worn books and family photographs, a sharp contrast to the sleek, impersonal office where Alexander had spent countless hours making deals and building his empire. As he dialed numbers from memory, he noticed a familiar face in one of the frames, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, bearing a striking resemblance to Sarah. His first few calls were frustrating dead ends. Former colleagues either wouldn't take his calls or offered carefully worded responses that revealed nothing. But his fifth call to a junior accountant who had always been overlooked in the office proved illuminating. "Mr. Sterling," the young man whispered, "I've been trying to reach you. There's something you need to know about the week before everything happened. I saw Mr. Wright meeting with your wife and some people I didn't recognize. They were in the conference room after hours, looking at documents about your mother's trust fund." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. His mother's trust fund had been substantial, carefully managed by him personally after his father's passing. It was money he had never touched, even during the company's darkest hours. "Listen carefully," the accountant continued, his voice dropping even lower. "They were talking about medical records and something called Project Butterfly. I couldn't hear everything, but they mentioned a care facility and..." The line suddenly went dead. Alexander stared at the silent phone, his mind racing. Tumrayait. Butterfly. He had never heard of it, but something about the name tickled at the edges of his memory. His mother had always loved butterflies, filling her garden with plants specifically to attract them. A soft knock at the door startled him. Sarah stood there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. In her hands was a weathered notebook, its pages marked with colorful tabs. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to promise me that you won't let them know I have this. They'll hurt Mrs. Rose and Mr. Rose if they find out." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "Who will hurt them, Sarah?" "The people who hurt my mom," she replied, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "She was a nurse at Evergreen Care Facility. She found out something she wasn't supposed to know, and then—" Sarah's voice caught. "Then she got sick, really fast, just like your mum." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Alexander processed her words. He looked more closely at the photograph he had noticed earlier, the woman with Sarah's eyes. According to the date on the frame, it had been taken just last year. Sarah opened the notebook, revealing pages of hurried handwriting and what appeared to be medical notes. "Mom kept records of everything," she explained. "She was trying to prove that something wrong was happening at the facility. That's when she met your mother." Alexander's hands shook as he took the notebook. There, in neat nursing shorthand, were detailed observations about unusual treatment protocols, unauthorized medication changes, and a recurring reference to Project B. But what made his heart stop was a loose photograph tucked between the pages. His mother and Sarah's sitting together in the facility's garden, surrounded by butterflies. "Your mother was trying to help mine," Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. "They were going to expose everything, but then—" A sudden crash from downstairs cut through the tension. Mrs. Rose's voice called out in alarm, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. "They found me," she whispered, clutching the notebook to her chest. "They finally found me." Alexander moved instinctively, pulling Sarah behind him as shadows appeared beneath the study door. The comfortable illusion of safety in this humble home was about to be shattered, and he realized with crystal clarity that his fall from grace had been merely the beginning of a much larger, more sinister plot. Alexander's mind raced as he assessed their options. The study had one window overlooking the back garden, but they were on the second floor. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the sound of doors being thrown open along the hallway. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "is there another way out?" "Over here." The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. "The attic," she mouthed, pointing to a nearly invisible cord hanging from the ceiling in the corner. Alexander had mistaken it for a light switch pull earlier. With trembling fingers, Sarah pulled the cord, revealing a collapsible ladder that descended silently from the ceiling. Years of expensive business training kicked in as Alexander made split-second decisions. He quickly photographed several pages of the notebook with his phone before helping Sarah tuck it into her jacket. They had barely made it halfway up the ladder when the study door burst open. Alexander caught a glimpse of two men in expensive suits, the kind he used to wear, before he pulled the attic ladder up behind them. Sarah led him through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had made this journey before, weaving between old trunks and boxes. "Mrs. Rose lets me come up here sometimes," she whispered, "when the memories get too hard to handle." Shout from below made them both freeze. "Check the attic!" The sound of the ladder being pulled down again echoed through the wooden floor. Sarah tugged Alexander's sleeve, pulling him toward a small window that opened onto the roof. The evening sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neighboring buildings. As they squeezed through the window, Alexander could hear Mrs. Rose's voice below, giving the intruders a piece of her mind. "How dare you barge into my home? Like this, I've already called the police." Alexander's heart swelled with admiration for the elderly woman's courage, but there was no time to dwell on it. Sarah was already moving across the slanted roof with practiced ease, heading toward a point where an old oak tree's branches reached out toward the house. Just as they reached the tree, a familiar voice made Alexander's blood run cold. "Oh, Rose, still playing the protective grandmother. Tell us where the girl is, and maybe we won't look too closely at your fostering license." It was Catherine, his ex-wife. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a horrifying pattern. Sarah had already begun climbing down the tree, her small form nearly invisible among the leaves. Alexander followed, his designer shoes slipping on the bark. A branch cracked beneath his weight, drawing shouts from the window above. They hit the ground running, Sarah leading the way through a maze of back alleys she clearly knew well. Alexander could hear pursuit behind them, but the narrow passages and sharp turns worked to their advantage. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged onto a busy street. "Quick!" Sarah gasped, pulling him toward a crowded diner. They slipped inside, sliding into a booth, just as two men in suits ran past the window. The waitress approached their table, concern evident on her face as she took in their disheveled appearance and heavy breathing. "You two okay?" Alexander was about to respond when he noticed her name tag. Linda. His heart skipped a beat as he remembered. Something from Sarah's mother's notebook. A note about a waitress named Linda, who had helped her document the suspicious activities at Evergreen Care Facility. "Linda," he said carefully, "did you used to work near Evergreen Care Facility?" The waitress's friendly smile froze, her eyes darting between them with new awareness. "You'd better come with me," she said quietly. "Through the kitchen. There are some people you need to meet." As they followed Linda through the bustling kitchen and out a back door, Alexander realized that Sarah's mother had built a network of allies, people who knew pieces of the truth about what was happening at Evergreen. The question was, would it be enough to protect them from whatever force had orchestrated his downfall and was now hunting Sarah? The sound of police sirens in the distance made them all pause. "They'll have called it in," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. "They always do. They've got people everywhere." Linda led them to a nondescript van parked in the alley. "Get in," she said, pulling open the side door. "I'm taking you to someone who can help, someone your mother trusted, Sarah. And, Mr. Sterling, you're about to learn why your company really went bankrupt." The van wound through the city's back streets, taking a circuitous route that Alexander recognized as a technique to shake potential followers. Linda drove with the confident precision of someone who had done this before, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. Sarah sat quietly beside him, her small hand still clutching her mother's notebook. In the growing darkness, she looked even younger and more vulnerable, yet there was a strength in her posture that reminded Alexander of his mother's final days. That same quiet determination to face whatever came next. "Your mother," he said softly. "She didn't just happen to be my mother's nurse, did she?" Sarah shook her head. "Mom was investigating Project Butterfly for months before your mother arrived at Evergreen. When they brought Mrs. Sterling in, Mom recognized the pattern. The same suddenly worsening symptoms, the same unauthorized medication changes. But why?" Alexander's voice cracked. "Why target our mothers?" "Because," Linda called from the front seat, "they were both too observant, too connected, and too principled. Just like Sarah's mother, your mother started noticing things at Evergreen, patterns in how certain wealthy patients were being treated, but more importantly, she had access to something they desperately wanted." The van turned into an underground parking garage beneath an old apartment building. Linda parked near a service elevator, then turned to face them. "Your mother was the trustee of the Sterling Family Medical Foundation, wasn't she, Mr. Sterling?" Alexander nodded slowly. The foundation had been his father's legacy, established decades ago to fund innovative medical research. He had left its management entirely to his mother, focusing instead on building his business empire. "The foundation's board was set to vote on a major grant proposal," Linda continued, "one that would have exposed everything happening at Evergreen. Your mother was the swing vote." The service elevator opened to reveal a surprisingly modern office space. Computer screens lined the walls, displaying what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations around the city. A tall, distinguished-looking man stood from behind a desk, his face registering shock as he saw Alexander. "James?" Alexander gasped, recognizing his mother's longtime attorney and friend. "Hello, Alex," James replied grimly. "I've been expecting you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He gestured to a wall covered in photographs and documents connected by red strings. "Your mother and Sarah's weren't the only victims. We've identified 12 others in the past year alone." Alexander approached the wall, his legs trembling. There, in the center of the web of connections, was a familiar face, Thomas Wright, his former CFO. But surrounding him were other faces he recognized, board members from his company, doctors from Evergreen, and most shocking of all, Catherine. "It's not just about the foundation," Sarah spoke up, opening her mother's notebook. "Mom found evidence that they were using patients to test experimental treatments. Treatments that weren't just unsafe, they were designed to fail." James nodded gravely. "The more severe the patient's reactions, the more funding they could request for emergency research. Your mother's foundation wasn't the only target, but it was the biggest. They needed her out of the way, and they needed your company's resources. The bankruptcy wasn't an accident, Alexander. It was engineered to force you to sell your controlling shares." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Alexander thought back to all the seemingly random setbacks, the suspicious timing of critical mistakes, the convenient emergencies that had kept him from his mother's side in her final days. A sudden commotion at the security desk caught everyone's attention. On one of the monitors, they could see several men in suits entering the building's lobby. Leading them was Catherine, her face set in the cold expression Alexander had come to know so well in their final months together. "They found us," Sarah whispered, pressing closer to Alexander's side. James moved quickly to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a safe. "There's something you need to see," he said, pulling out a thick envelope. "Your mother left this with me the day before she was admitted to Evergreen. She said to give it to you only if something happened to her." Before he could hand over the envelope, the lights in the office suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the wall of evidence. The sound of footsteps in the stairwell echoed through the quiet office. Linda moved toward a concealed door, gesturing urgently. "This way. We have a safe house ready." But Alexander stood rooted to the spot, staring at the envelope in James's hands. Whatever was inside had cost his mother her life. Now it might be their only chance to expose the truth and protect Sarah from the same fate. The decision was made in a split second. Alexander grabbed the envelope from James and followed. Linda toward the hidden exit, pulling Sarah along with him. Behind them, James quickly began destroying files and wiping computer drives. "I'll hold them off," the attorney promised, his voice firm. "Get to the safe house. Everything your mother found is in that envelope, Alexander. Everything they never wanted you to see." They slipped through the concealed door just as the main office entrance burst open. Through the thin wall, they could hear Catherine's voice, sharp with frustration. "Where are they, James? Don't play games with me. You know what's at stake." Linda led them down a narrow maintenance corridor, the emergency lights casting strange shadows on the concrete walls. Sarah moved silently beside Alexander, her steps sure despite the dim lighting. It was clear she had experience moving through hidden spaces, staying invisible when necessary. "There's a tunnel system," Linda explained, as they descended a metal staircase. "It connects several buildings in the area. It was used during Prohibition, but nowadays only maintenance workers know about it, and people like us who need to stay off the grid." As they moved through the underground passage, Alexander clutched the envelope from his mother, his mind racing. What evidence had she gathered? What had she discovered that was worth orchestrating such an elaborate conspiracy to silence her? They emerged in the basement of what appeared to be an abandoned department store. Linda led them to a freight elevator, then up to a converted loft space that showed signs of regular use, fresh food in the kitchen, modern security systems, and multiple escape routes. "We'll be safe here for now," Linda assured them, activating an elaborate security system. "They don't know about this place. Sarah's mother helped set it up before." She trailed off, glancing at the young girl. Alexander sat at a table near a window overlooking the city, the envelope trembling in his hands. Sarah pulled up a chair beside him, her face solemn. "You need to open it," she said softly. "Mom always said the truth hurts less than lies." With careful fingers, Alexander broke the seal on the envelope. Inside, he found a USB drive, several documents, and a handwritten letter in his mother's elegant script. "My dearest Alexander," he read aloud, his voice catching. If you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct. What I've discovered at Evergreen goes beyond simple medical malpractice. They're using the facility to conduct unauthorized trials on patients, deliberately inducing critical conditions to justify emergency treatments. But that's just the surface. He spread out the documents as he continued reading. They revealed a complex web of shell companies, all leading back to a pharmaceutical corporation called New Dawn Therapeutics. Clinical trial data had been falsified, showing positive results for treatments that were actually causing severe reactions. The Sterling Family Medical Foundation wasn't their only target, Sarah added, pulling her mother's notebook from her jacket. Mom found connections to 3 other medical foundations. They were systematically targeting board members, either buying them out or removing them. Linda, who had been monitoring the security feeds, joined them at the table. New Dawn needed these foundations' funding and approval to fast-track their treatments through FDA trials. When traditional methods failed, they resorted to more aggressive tactics. Alexander's hands shook as he reached the end of his mother's letter. My darling boy, I know you'll blame yourself for not seeing this sooner, for not answering my last call. Don't. You were exactly where they wanted you to be, too busy, too distracted by the artificial crises they created in your company. I've entrusted this information to James because I know they're watching me. The evidence on the USB drive should be enough to expose everything, but be careful. Catherine isn't just your wife. She's New Dawn's legal counsel, and she's been playing a much longer game than any of us realized. A soft beeping from the security system interrupted them. Linda rushed to check the monitors, her face growing pale. We have a problem, she announced. Someone just accessed the building's security system. They're overriding the locks. Sarah immediately moved to grab her notebook, but Alexander caught her arm. Wait, he said, an idea forming. Maybe it's time we stopped running. What do you mean? Linda asked, still monitoring the security feeds. My mother spent her last days gathering evidence. Sarah's mother gave her life to expose the truth. We have everything we need right here to bring them down, but as long as we're running, we're playing their game. Alexander stood, a plan taking shape in his mind. What if we could turn their own trap against them? Linda and Sarah listened intently as Alexander outlined his plan. Years of corporate strategy had taught him one crucial lesson. Sometimes the best defense was a carefully planned offensive. He quickly connected his phone to the secure Wi-Fi network Linda provided. First, we need to make copies of everything, he said, plugging in the USB drive. My mother was brilliant. She didn't just gather evidence, she created a digital trail. Every document, every piece of data is time-stamped and authenticated. Sarah opened her mother's notebook, spreading out the pages. Mom kept records of every unauthorized treatment, every patient who showed unusual symptoms. She even managed to get photos of unauthorized personnel entering the restricted wings at night. As they worked to digitize and organize the evidence, Alexander explained the next phase of his plan. New Dawn Therapeutics isn't just Catherine's client, it's their whole operation, but they've been careful to keep their name out of anything controversial. Every questionable trial, every suspicious incident was handled through subsidiaries and shell companies. Linda nodded in understanding. That's why they were so desperate to get control of the Sterling Foundation. They needed a legitimate front for their research. Exactly, Alexander confirmed. But they made one crucial mistake. They got greedy. The same pattern of shell companies, the same methods of removing obstacles. It's all documented. My mother saw it and so did Sarah's. Now we just need to make sure everyone else sees it too. He pulled up his email on his phone, quickly composing messages to key contacts. Investigative journalists, medical oversight boards, and most importantly, the other foundation board members who had been targeted. We're not just sending evidence of what they did, he explained. We're exposing their entire methodology. Every foundation they targeted, every board member they pressured or removed, it all follows the same pattern. Once people know what to look for, their whole house of cards will collapse. A loud bang from the floor below made them all jump. The security feeds showed armed men making their way up through the building. Among them was Thomas Wright, Alexander's Former CFO speaking urgently into a phone. They're getting desperate, Linda observed. They know we have enough to destroy them. Sarah, who had been quiet for several minutes, suddenly spoke up. There's something else they don't know about. She pulled a small key from around her neck. Mom didn't keep everything in her notebook. She had a safety deposit box. She gave me the key the night before she got sick. She said to only use it if things got really bad. Alexander looked at the young girl with newfound respect. Even in her final hours, Sarah's mother had been thinking ahead, creating one last failsafe. Where's the box? First National Bank, downtown branch, box 447. Sarah's voice was steady. Mom said the evidence in there would be enough to put them away for good. The sound of footsteps in the stairwell was getting closer. Linda quickly moved to the window, checking their possible escape routes. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they reach this floor. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide now. Alexander looked at the security feed showing Catherine and Thomas Wright directing their men. His ex-wife's face was tight with tension. She knew how close they were to losing everything. Years of marriage had taught him to read her expressions, and right now she was terrified. They're not just coming to silence us, he realized aloud. They're coming to destroy evidence, which means they don't know about the safety deposit box, Sarah finished. Mom never told them, even when... She trailed off, her eyes shining with fierce pride. Alexander made a quick decision. Linda, take Sarah to the bank. Use the back exit we saw on the way in. I'll stay here, keep them distracted, make them think we're still trying to protect what we have here. No, Sarah protested. They'll hurt you. Alexander knelt down to look her in the eyes. Sarah, listen to me. Your mother and my mother gave everything to expose the truth. Now it's our turn to be brave. I'll be fine. They won't risk anything too obvious, not when they're this close to being exposed. But you need to get to that safety deposit box. The palm. Sound of breaking glass from the floor below made their decision for them. Linda grabbed Sarah's hand, leading her toward the hidden back exit. The young girl looked back one last time at Alexander. Promise you'll be careful, she demanded. Just promise you won't let them win. Alexander smiled, seeing in her the same strength he'd recognized in his mother. I promise. Now go. Finish what our mothers started. As Linda and Sarah disappeared through the hidden exit, Alexander turned to face the main door. He could hear footsteps approaching, and for the first time since that night on the train tracks, he felt truly alive. He had a purpose now, a chance to right the wrongs that had been done. And this time, he wasn't going to let anything stop him. Alexander stood calmly in the center of the room as the door burst open. Catherine strode in first, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor, followed by Thomas Wright and 2 security men. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scattered documents on the table. Really, Alexander, all this drama just to play detective? Her voice dripped with condescension, but he could hear the undertone of anxiety. Where's the girl? Safe, he replied simply, watching as Thomas began gathering the papers from the table. You know, Catherine, I've been wondering something. When exactly did you start working for New Dawn? Was it before or after we got married? A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she masked it. You're asking the wrong questions, as usual. Where's the USB drive and the notebook? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Alexander leaned against the table, projecting a confidence he hadn't felt in months. You must have thought I was such an easy mark. The workaholic CEO, too busy building his empire to notice what was happening right under his nose. Tell me, was any of it real? Or was I just another stepping stone in New Dawn's grand plan? Don't be melodramatic, Catherine snapped. Business is business. We needed access to certain resources and you had them. The marriage was convenient. And my mother, was she just convenient too? Alexander's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists. Or did she become a problem when she started asking too many questions about New Dawn's clinical trials? Thomas Wright stepped forward, his face tight with tension. Your mother was going to destroy years of research, millions in investment. We tried to reason with her, to make her understand the bigger picture, but she was too stubborn, too caught up in her outdated ethical concerns. Ethical concerns like not experimenting on vulnerable patients? Alexander shot back. like not falsifying trial data to push dangerous treatments through FDA approval? You don't understand what's at stake, Catherine interjected. New Dawn is developing treatments that could revolutionize medicine. Yes, there are risks, but progress requires sacrifice. Sacrifice? Alexander's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call what happened to Sarah's mother? To all the other whistleblowers who conveniently fell ill after threatening to expose your operation? A shadow passed over Catherine's face. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't know how to mind their own business. She gestured to one of the security men. Search the place. Find the drive and the notebook. As the men began methodically tearing apart the room, Alexander noticed Catherine checking her phone repeatedly, her agitation growing. They were running out of time, which meant Linda and Sarah were getting closer to the bank. You know what I find interesting? He continued, keeping their attention focused on him. How a company like New Dawn, with all its resources and connections, could be so threatened by a young girl with her mother's notebook. That young girl has evidence that could destroy everything we've built, Thomas snapped. Documents, photographs, witness statements. Her mother was thorough, I'll give her that. Catherine shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. They had just confirmed the value of Sarah's evidence, and more importantly, they had revealed their own desperation. Nothing here, one of the security men reported. Just some copied documents and an empty USB drive. Catherine's composure finally cracked. Where is it, Alexander? Where did you send them? You know, my mother called me the day before she went into Evergreen, Alexander said, ignoring her question. I was too busy to answer, too focused on the company's sudden financial crisis. The one you engineered, I assume. She left me a voicemail. Would you like to know what she said? The room fell silent. Even the security men stopped their searching to listen. She said she was proud of me, that no matter what happened next, she knew I would eventually figure it out and do the right thing. She knew you were watching her, Catherine. She knew what was coming, but she made sure the truth wouldn't stay buried forever. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Heavy footsteps approached, and Catherine's face lit up with anticipation. That would be our backup. Last chance, Alexander. Where is Sarah? But Alexander was no longer listening to her. Through the window behind Catherine, he could see police cars pulling up to the building, their lights flashing silently in the growing dusk. James had come through. His final act before being detained had been to contact the authorities. Catherine followed his gaze, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. No, she whispered. No, no, no. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder, but now they could hear something else mixed in with them, the distinctive sound of police radios. While Alexander kept Catherine and her associates distracted, Linda and Sarah raced through the city streets toward First National Bank. The afternoon sun was sinking behind the skyscrapers, casting long shadows across their path. They had less than 30 minutes until the bank closed. We're not going to make it, Sarah panted as they waited at yet another red light. They'll close the vault. Linda squeezed her hand reassuringly. Yes, we will. Your mom didn't just choose this bank by chance. I used to work there before I started helping at the diner. I still know people inside. They reached the bank with 10 minutes to spare. Linda straightened her clothes and led Sarah through the imposing front doors, projecting an air of casual confidence. At the security desk, she smiled warmly at the guard. Hey, Marcus. Long time no see. The guard's face lit up with recognition. Linda, what brings you back to our neck of the woods? Need to access a safety deposit box for my niece here, she said smoothly. Her mother's abroad, sent us to pick up some important papers. Marcus checked his watch. Cutting it pretty close, aren't you? You know how it is with kids' schedules these days, Linda laughed, always running from one activity to another. As they waited for the vault manager, Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she held out the key. Linda kept her arm around the girl's shoulders, both for comfort and to steady her. They could feel the weight of time pressing down on them, knowing that every minute brought them closer to discovery. The vault manager, a precise woman named Mrs. Chen, led them through the security procedures with methodical care. Box 447, you said. That's in the high security section. I'll need to see some additional identification. Linda's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her calm demeanor. She pulled out her old employee ID and a carefully forged authorization letter they'd prepared at the safe house. Mrs. Chen examined them closely, then nodded. Everything seems to be in order. Please follow me. The vault was exactly as Linda remembered it, cool, quiet, and lined with rows of identical metal boxes. Mrs. Chen located 447 and inserted her master key. "Whenever you're ready," she said, stepping back to give them privacy. Sarah's hands shook as she inserted her key. The box opened with a soft click, revealing a thick manila envelope and a small video camera. But what caught their attention was a USB drive labeled with a single butterfly sticker, the same symbol that had appeared on some of the mysterious Project Butterfly documents. "Mom," Sarah whispered, touching the butterfly sticker gently. She knew. She knew all along they'd try to stop her. Linda quickly transferred the contents into her shoulder bag, conscious of Mrs. Chen's presence and the ticking clock. As they turned to leave, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Wait," she said, reaching back into the box. There, tucked into a corner, was a small silver locket. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she recognized it, her mother's most prized possession. They had just reached the bank's lobby when Linda's phone buzzed with a text from one of their allies. "NYPD at the safe house. ANC in custody. Get to Channel 7 News now." Linda's mind raced. The local news station was just 3 blocks away, and she knew from her network of contacts that Sandra Chen, their top investigative reporter, had been quietly looking into New Dawn Therapeutics for months. "Change of plans," she told Sarah, hurrying them out of the bank. "We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth all at once." As they emerged onto the street, they could hear police sirens in the distance. Sarah clutched her mother's locket, drawing strength from it. "Mom always said the truth was like a butterfly," she said quietly. "Once it's free, you can't put it back in its cocoon." Linda hailed a taxi, her heart pounding. They had the evidence, they had their target, and most importantly, they had what Catherine and New Dawn feared most, the power to expose everything. "Channel 7 Studios," she told the driver, "and please hurry, we have a story that can't wait." In her bag, the USB drive with the butterfly sticker seemed to pulse with potential energy, like a small bomb waiting to detonate. But this explosion wouldn't destroy. It would illuminate, revealing the dark corners where corruption had flourished for too long. Sarah looked out the taxi window at the city rushing by, her mother's locket clasped tightly in her hand. Somewhere across town, Alexander was facing down the people who had orchestrated their losses. Now it was their turn to finish what their loved ones had started. The Channel 7 newsroom was a hive of activity when Linda and Sarah arrived. Through the glass doors, they could see producers and reporters rushing about, preparing for the evening news broadcast. Linda approached the security desk with practiced confidence. "We need to see Sandra Chen immediately," she announced. "Tell her it's about New Dawn Therapeutics and Project Butterfly." The security guard's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of New Dawn, but he made the call. Within minutes, Sandra Chen herself appeared in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with a reputation for breaking major corruption stories. "Inside, now." Sandra led them through the newsroom to a private conference room. "I've been investigating New Dawn for months, but they're like smoke. Every time I get close to something concrete, the evidence disappears." Linda placed her bag on the conference table. "Not this time," she said, pulling out the USB drive with the butterfly sticker. "This is everything you need: clinical trial data, financial records, internal communications, all authenticated and time-stamped." Sandra's eyes widened as she plugged in the drive and began scanning through the files. "This is incredible, but I'll need verification. Sources willing to go on record." "You have me," Sarah spoke up, her voice strong despite her obvious exhaustion. "My mom was a nurse at Evergreen Care Facility. She documented everything before she got sick. And we have Mr. Sterling's mother's evidence too." Sandra turned to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed something. Alexander Sterling, the CEO who lost everything. Her screen showed breaking news alerts about the police action at the safe house. "The same Sterling who's just been taken into protective custody. along with Catherine Wright Sterling and several New Dawn executives. Linda nodded. It's all connected. New Dawn needed the Sterling Family Medical Foundation to fast-track their trials. When Mrs. Sterling started asking questions, they orchestrated her son's downfall to distract him. But she left evidence that Sarah's mother helped collect. Sarah pulled out her mother's notebook, opening it to pages filled with detailed observations and damning photographs. Mom knew they would try to stop her. That's why she scattered the evidence, some with me, some with Mrs. Sterling, some in the safety deposit box. She knew that eventually someone would put it all together. Sandra was already on the phone with her producers. Push back the evening broadcast. I want this story leading the news at 6. She turned back to them. But I need you both to understand what's going to happen when this breaks. New Dawn has powerful friends. There will be pressure to kill the story. We're counting on that, Linda replied with a grim smile. Because we're not just giving you the evidence, we're giving you the names of everyone who helped cover it up. Judges who dismissed cases, regulators who looked the other way, politicians who accepted donations to block investigations. A producer burst into the room. Sandra, you need to. See this. New Dawn's lawyers are already trying to file an injunction to prevent any reporting about the company or Evergreen Care Facility. Too late, Sandra said, holding up a small memory card. I just uploaded everything to our secure server and sent copies to every major news outlet in the country. Even if they stop our broadcast, the story's already out there. Sarah touched her mother's locket, drawing strength from it. Mom always said that the truth was like light. It finds its way through even the smallest cracks. The conference room suddenly erupted with activity as more producers and researchers poured in, each bringing new pieces of the expanding story. Reports were coming in about police raids at New Dawn's offices and Evergreen Care Facility. Other whistleblowers, emboldened by the breaking news, were beginning to come forward. Linda received another text. Alexander safe. Catherine and Thomas in custody. More arrests happening at New Dawn headquarters. Sandra looked up from her computer, her face serious but excited. We go live in 30 minutes. Are you both ready to tell your story? Sarah squared her shoulders, looking more like her mother than ever. Yes, she said firmly. It's time everyone knew the truth. The newsroom beyond the conference room windows was now in full breaking news mode. Monitors showed police activity at multiple locations across the city. Phones were ringing constantly as more sources came forward. The story they had fought so hard to expose was finally breaking wide open. But even as they prepared for the broadcast, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that New Dawn's powerful allies wouldn't go down without a fight. They had won this battle, but the war for justice was far from over. Alexander watched the chaos unfold from a secure room at the police station, surrounded by detectives and FBI agents who had been quietly building their own case against New Dawn for months. On the television mounted on the wall, Channel 7's breaking news coverage was causing shockwaves through the city's power structure. Sandra Chen's voice cut through the room. In a stunning development, multiple sources have come forward with evidence of widespread medical fraud and criminal conspiracy at New Dawn Therapeutics and Evergreen Care Facility. Police have confirmed several arrests, including prominent executives and legal counsel Catherine Wright Sterling. The door opened, and James walked in, looking tired but triumphant. The DA's office is moving fast. They're afraid some of the smaller players might try to flee. Catherine's already trying to make a deal. Alexander barely heard him, his attention fixed on the screen where Sarah was speaking, her young face composed despite the gravity of the moment. She was describing her mother's discovery of Project Butterfly and the systematic abuse of vulnerable patients. My mom knew what would happen when she started gathering evidence, Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, but she also knew she had to stop them. She and Mrs. Sterling worked together to document everything, the unauthorized treatments, the falsified data, the threats against anyone who tried to speak up. The camera cut to Sandra Chen. We're now learning that this conspiracy extended far beyond a single care facility. Documents show a pattern of intimidation and corruption reaching into regulatory agencies, financial institutions, and local government. A detective approached with a tablet. "Mr. Sterling, we need you to look at something. We found these files in a hidden server at New Dawn's headquarters. They detail payments to various shell companies, all linked to your former CFO." Alexander scrolled through the documents, his hands shaking slightly. There it was, proof of every transaction that had led to his company's collapse, all orchestrated to force him to sell his controlling shares to New Dawn's shell companies. "They needed my shares," he realized aloud. "Not just for the money, but for the voting rights in the medical foundation. They wanted to control all the major medical research foundations in the city." James nodded grimly. "Your mother figured it out. That's why she started working with Sarah's mother. They knew they needed ironclad evidence to expose the whole operation." The television showed footage of police leading Thomas Wright from New Dawn's offices in handcuffs. Behind him, teams of investigators were carrying out boxes of documents and computer equipment. A young FBI agent burst into the room. "Sir, we've got movement at all the major banks. Someone's trying to transfer large sums out of New Dawn's accounts. Multiple transactions, all just under the reporting threshold." "Stop them," Alexander said firmly. "Those funds, they're not just company money. They're what's left of the Foundation's research grants. My mother would want it returned to where it belongs. Funding. Legitimate medical research." The agent nodded and rushed out. On the screen, the story continued to unfold. More whistleblowers were coming forward. Other news stations were picking up the story. The butterfly effect that Sarah's mother had set in motion was spreading, growing, becoming unstoppable. James put a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "They're bringing Catherine in for questioning now. Do you want to be there?" Alexander shook his head, watching as Sarah finished her interview. "No, I need to make sure the foundation is secured first. My mother protected it until her last breath. Now it's my turn to honor that legacy." The room buzzed with activity as more evidence poured in. Files were being recovered, witnesses were coming forward, and the full scope of New Dawn's operation was becoming clear. But Alexander's thoughts were with the brave nurse who had risked everything to expose the truth, and with her remarkable daughter who had helped bring it all to light. On the television, Sarah touched the locket at her neck as she delivered her final words to the camera. "Mum always said that sometimes the smallest actions can create the biggest changes. Like a butterfly flapping its wings, you never know how far the effects will spread." She believed that one person standing up for truth could inspire others to do the same. And she was right. The story was breaking across all major networks. Now, New Dawn's carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing, and with it, the corrupt system that had protected them for so long. But even in this moment of victory, Alexander knew that their work was far from over. Justice was just the beginning. Now came the task of rebuilding, of ensuring that such corruption could never take root again. The hours following the news broadcast were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander found himself in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by evidence boards and computer screens, displaying the ever-expanding web of New Dawn's corruption. But something was nagging at him, a detail from his mother's letter that hadn't quite fit. "There's more," he said suddenly, interrupting a briefing about offshore accounts. "The clinical trials weren't just about fast-tracking approvals. My mother wrote about unauthorized personnel in the restricted wing at night. Why would a pharmaceutical company need secret access to patients after hours?" Agent Rebecca Torres, the lead investigator, pulled up a series of surveillance photos from Sarah's mother's evidence. "We've been wondering the same thing. Look at these individuals entering Evergreen. None of them match New Dawn's employee records, but their access cards all use the same security protocols as senior executives." A junior agent rushed in with a fresh stack of documents. "Sir, we've found something in the encrypted files from Thomas Wright's computer. Project Butterfly wasn't just one program. It was 3 separate operations running simultaneously." The screens filled with flowcharts and code names. Alexander leaned forward, his heart racing as he recognized a pattern. These trial groups, they're not random. Look at the patient histories. Every person in Group C had previous exposure to experimental treatments from other pharmaceutical companies. They were specifically targeting patients who had already been part of failed trials. Linda, who had been quietly observing from a corner, stepped forward. Sarah's mother noticed something similar. She kept separate records of patients who had unusual reactions, not just to New Dawn's treatments, but to any experimental medication they'd received in the past. Agent Torres's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Catherine's ready to talk, but she's demanding immunity in exchange for information about something called Protocol Zero. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered finding that phrase in his mother's notes, always followed by a question mark. Before he could speak, another agent burst into the room. "We have a situation at Evergreen. Someone's trying to access the secure servers. They're deleting files remotely. Stop them," Agent Torres barked, but Alexander was already shaking his head. "That's not the real target," he said, his mind racing. "The files are just a distraction. What else is happening at Evergreen right now?" Linda was already on her phone, checking with her network of contacts. Her face suddenly went pale. 3 unmarked vans just pulled up to the restricted wing. "They're evacuating patients." "Not evacuating," Alexander corrected grimly. "Eliminating evidence. The patients in that wing aren't just test subjects. They're proof of something bigger. Something New Dawn has been working toward for years." Agent Torres grabbed her coat. "I want tactical teams at Evergreen now. No one leaves that facility until we secure every patient and every record." But Alexander caught her arm. "Wait, Sarah's mother discovered their patient transfer protocols. They'll have contingency sites ready. We need to move on all of them simultaneously." "How many sites?" "3, Linda answered, consulting Sarah's mother's notebook. She found references to facilities in abandoned medical buildings, places that wouldn't attract attention. The room erupted into action as agents coordinated with local police and FBI teams in other cities. Alexander studied the evidence board, his eyes drawn to a photo of Catherine meeting with unknown men in expensive suits. "I want to talk to her," he said quietly. Agent Torres hesitated. "Alexander, she's not just your ex-wife anymore. She's a key conspirator in what might be the largest medical fraud case in history." "Exactly," he replied, "and she's scared enough to offer information about Protocol Zero. Whatever that is, it's bigger than the trial data, bigger than the financial fraud. It's what my mother and Sarah's mother discovered, the truth they gave their lives to expose." The agent studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You have 15 minutes. Make them count." As Alexander was led toward the interrogation rooms, Linda received another urgent text. Her sharp intake of breath made everyone turn. "What is it?" Agent Torres demanded. Linda looked up, her face grim. "Sarah just called from the safe house. She found something else in her mother's locket, a microchip hidden behind the photo, and she says there's something we all need to see." The interrogation room was cold and sterile, much like the facilities where Catherine had orchestrated her experiments. She sat perfectly poised in her designer suit, but Alexander could see the cracks in her facade, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes couldn't quite meet his. "I wondered when you'd come," she said softly. "Always the last to figure things out, weren't you, Alex?" "Protocol Zero," he replied simply. "Tell me." Catherine's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something close to fear. "You have no idea what you're asking about. What's really at stake here? Try me." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Did you ever wonder why New Dawn was so interested in patients from failed trials? Why we specifically tracked people who had unexpected reactions to experimental treatments?" Before she could continue, the door burst open. Agent Torres rushed in, her face urgent. "Alexander, you need to see this. Now." In the conference room, Sarah was on a secure video link, the microchip's contents displayed on the screens around her. But it wasn't clinical data or financial records, it was a series of genetic profiles. "Mum found a pattern," Sarah explained, her young face intense with concentration. "The patients who had the strongest reactions to experimental treatments, they all shared certain genetic markers that shouldn't have been there. A geneticist the FBI had brought in was studying the data with growing alarm. "These are engineered sequences," she announced. "Someone has been systematically modifying these patients' genetic structure, through a series of seemingly unrelated drug trials. Not modifying, Catherine's voice came from the doorway where agents had brought her. Preparing. All eyes turned to her. Agent Torres motioned for her to continue. Protocol Zero was never about developing new treatments, Catherine said, sinking into a chair. It was about creating them. Human beings genetically engineered to produce specific pharmaceutical compounds in their own bodies, living drug factories. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Alexander felt sick as he realized the full scope of what his company had unknowingly been involved in. The foundation grants, he said slowly. They weren't just for research funding. You needed access to multiple trial populations, ways to track genetic changes across different studies. Catherine nodded. Phase 1 was identification, finding people with genetic profiles that could be successfully modified. Phase 2 was preparation, using various trials to gradually alter their DNA. Phase 3, she trailed off, was going to start next week, Sarah finished, holding up a calendar from her mother's notebook. Mom found the schedule. They were going to begin harvesting compounds from the patients in the restricted wing. Agent Torres was already on her phone, coordinating with the teams at Evergreen, but Alexander was watching Catherine, seeing something he'd never noticed before. Genuine regret. Your mother figured it out first, she told him. She found inconsistencies in the trial data, started asking questions about genetic testing protocols. When she threatened to take it to the ethics board, Catherine's voice caught. I didn't want her hurt, just scared enough to back off, but Thomas and the others, they decided she knew too much. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Mom said Mrs. Sterling showed her the evidence the day before she got sick. That's when she gave me the locket and the safety deposit box. Key. The geneticist was still studying the data, her expression growing more troubled. These modifications, they're incredibly sophisticated, the kind of research that would take decades and billions of dollars to develop. New Dawn couldn't have done this alone. They didn't, Catherine confirmed. We were just the final stage, the public face. The real work was done by others, people so powerful they don't even need names, just numbered Swiss bank accounts and encrypted communications. Alexander thought of all the patients in Evergreen's restricted wing, unwitting test subjects in an experiment more horrific than anyone had imagined. We have to stop them. You can't, Catherine said quietly. Even with everything you've exposed, you've only scratched the surface. They'll just relocate, rebrand, start over somewhere else. They've done it before. But Sarah was shaking her head through the video link. No, they won't, because Mum didn't just document what they did. She left a trail. Every shell company, every hidden account, every secret facility. Hey, it's all there, encrypted in fragments across different drives and documents like pieces of a puzzle. A puzzle you've just helped us complete, Agent Torres said to Catherine, whether you meant to or not. The screens around them filled with new data as Sarah and the FBI technicians pieced together the hidden clues from years of careful documentation. Account numbers, security clearances, names of people who thought themselves too powerful to be touched. And as the full picture emerged, Alexander finally understood what his mother had meant in her final letter. The truth, once revealed, spreads like light through darkness, and even the most powerful shadows cannot survive in the light. The FBI command center had transformed into a war room. Multiple screens displayed surveillance feeds from Evergreen and the other suspected facilities, while teams of analysts worked to decrypt the remaining files from Sarah's mother's collection of evidence. Time was running out. They knew Dawn's partners would be working just as hard to cover their tracks. We've got movement at Facility 2, an agent announced, pointing to one of the feeds. Multiple vehicles approaching. Looks like private security. Alexander studied the footage, remembering something from his mother's notes. Those aren't security guards, he said grimly. Look at their equipment, they're a cleanup crew. Agent Torres immediately grabbed her radio. All units at Facility 2, be advised, incoming hostiles, protect those patients at all costs. Sarah, still connected via secure video link, was working with the FBI's tech team to decode more of her mother's encrypted files. Her young face showed the strain of the past few hours, but her determination never wavered. Mom used a special system, she explained, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She split everything into pieces, hiding them in different places. She knew they'd try to destroy any single collection of evidence. Linda, who had been coordinating with her network of healthcare workers, suddenly straightened. "The nursing schedules," she said. "Sarah, remember how your mother always insisted on handling the restricted wing schedules herself?" Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. "The duty roster. It wasn't just about keeping track of staff. She was documenting everyone who accessed the wing, every unauthorized entry, every unscheduled treatment." "More than that," Alexander added, catching on. "She was tracking patterns, specific dates when certain patients were moved or when new ones arrived, correlating them with New Dawn's trial phases." The geneticist who had been analyzing the patient data looked up sharply. The genetic modifications, they had to be done in a specific sequence. "If we can match the schedule to the patient's progression, we can prove it was deliberate," Agent Torres finished. "Not just experimentation, but a systematic program of human genetic manipulation." Catherine, still under guard in the corner, laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand. Even with all this evidence, you're only seeing the surface. Protocol Zero isn't just about creating living drug factories. It's about control. Imagine being able to engineer people to produce specific compounds on command. Whole populations dependent on treatments that only certain companies can provide." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just medical fraud or corporate corruption. It was something far more sinister. A junior agent burst into the room. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. Someone's accessing the secure servers. At all 3 facilities simultaneously. They're initiating some kind of protocol." Sarah's face went pale. "Mom wrote about this. It's their fail-safe. If they can't move the patients, they'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "How long?" Agent Torres demanded. 20 minutes, maybe less. The system's locked us out." Alexander moved to the main screen, studying the facility layouts. "We don't need to stop the protocol," he said. "We need to evacuate, now, get every patient out." "Of those facilities, there are over 100 patients across the 3 locations," Linda protested. "We don't have enough time or transport." "Yes, we do." Sarah's voice was firm. "Mom didn't just document their crimes. She created escape routes, emergency protocols of her own. Check the maintenance schedules for the restricted wings." Linda quickly pulled up the files. There it was, hidden in routine maintenance reports. Detailed plans for emergency evacuations, alternative exits, transport arrangements, even backup medical support. "She thought of everything," Alexander whispered, his throat tight with emotion. Even facing unimaginable danger, Sarah's mother had never stopped fighting to protect her patients. Agent Torres was already mobilizing her teams. "All units, initiate emergency evacuation protocols. Priority is patient safety. Download what data you can, but get those people out." As the room erupted into action, Sarah continued working on the encrypted files. Suddenly she gasped. "There's something else, something bigger." Mom didn't just document Protocol Zero. She found evidence of other projects, more facilities. This is happening all over the world. The screens around her filled with new data, locations, dates, connections to pharmaceutical companies, and research institutions across the globe. The true scope of the conspiracy was finally becoming clear. Catherine watched from her corner, her face a mixture of resignation and relief. "Now you're beginning to understand. This was never about one company or one project. It's about the future of human evolution itself. And the people behind it, they won't stop just because you've exposed one operation." "Maybe not," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "But thanks to 2 incredibly brave women, we know who they are, what they're doing, and most importantly, how to stop them." The clock was ticking. In facilities across the city, teams raced to evacuate patients before the fail-safe protocols could be activated. But even as they fought this immediate battle, Alexander knew the real war was just beginning. The evidence Sarah's mother had gathered wouldn't just expose Protocol Zero, it would unravel decades of secret experimentation and corporate corruption. And somewhere in the city's shadows, the powerful figures behind it all were about to discover that their greatest fear had come true. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the dark. The next 15 minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos. FBI teams and emergency medical personnel swarmed the three facilities, implementing the evacuation protocols Sarah's mother had so carefully hidden within years of maintenance reports. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from alternate power sources to secure transport routes. In the command center, Sarah continued to unlock more of her mother's encrypted files, each new revelation adding to the mounting evidence of a global conspiracy. The geneticist worked alongside her, growing more alarmed with each new piece of data. These genetic modifications, she explained, pointing to complex molecular diagrams. They're not just about producing pharmaceutical compounds, they're creating biological triggers, switches that can be activated by specific chemical combinations. Switches for what? Agent Torres asked, though her expression suggested she already feared the answer. Everything. Hormone production, immune response, even neurological functions. With the right combination of triggers, they could theoretically control any biological process in the modified subjects. Alexander thought of all the patients in those facilities, people who had sought help for legitimate medical conditions, only to become unwitting test subjects in an experiment beyond their darkest nightmares. 10 minutes until fail-safe protocols activate, an agent announced. Linda's phone buzzed with updates from the evacuation teams. Facility 1 is clear. Facility 2 at 80%, Facility 3. They're having trouble with the secure wing. The doors aren't responding to emergency overrides. Mom wrote about this, Sarah said, frantically searching through files. There's a manual release, but it's in the basement level, in the maintenance room. Alexander was already moving. Send me the location. I'll get there faster than a team can mobilize. Not alone you won't, Linda said, grabbing her coat. I know those buildings. I used to make deliveries there before. She glanced at Sarah, leaving the rest unsaid. Agent Torres nodded sharply. Go, we'll coordinate from here. Sarah, keep working on those files. There might be other fail-safes we don't know about. The drive to Facility 3 took precious minutes, even with police escort. Alexander and Linda ran through the eerily empty corridors, following Sarah's directions through their earpieces. The building's emergency lights cast strange shadows, and somewhere above them, they could hear the sounds of the evacuation continuing. 7 minutes, Sarah's voice crackled through their earpieces. They found the maintenance room exactly where Sarah's mother had documented it, but as they entered, they realized they weren't alone. A figure stepped from the shadows, Thomas Wright. I wondered if you'd figure it out, he said, holding what looked like a remote detonator. Catherine always said you were smarter than you appeared. Step away from the controls, Thomas, Alexander said calmly, though his heart was racing. It's over. The evidence is out, all of it. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Evidence can be discredited. Witnesses can be discredited. We've done it before. Not this time, Linda replied. Sarah's mother made sure of that. The truth is already spreading. Too many people know. 6 minutes, Sarah's voice warned. Thomas's smile faltered slightly. Do you have any idea what you're interrupting? The advances we're making. These protocols could revolutionize human medicine. You're not advancing medicine, Alexander shot back. You're creating weapons. Human beings engineered to be controlled through chemical triggers. That's not medicine. It's genocide. It's evolution, Thomas insisted. Directed evolution. The next step in human development. 5 minutes. Linda had been slowly moving around the room as they talked, positioning herself near a breaker panel she remembered from the building plans. Evolution isn't something you force, she said. Sarah's mother understood that. So did Mrs. Sterling. That's why they fought so hard to expose you. Thomas's face darkened. Ah, yes, the noble whistleblowers. Such a waste. They could have been part of something revolutionary. Instead, they chose to stand in the way of progress. 4 minutes. Alexander saw Linda's hand move slightly toward the breaker panel. He kept talking, holding Thomas's attention. "You know what I realized? You never actually cared about the medical advances. This was always about power, control, the ability to literally reprogram human beings." 3 minutes. "You understand?" "Nothing," Thomas snarled, his careful facade cracking. "The power to reshape humanity, to direct our own evolution, that's beyond profit, beyond corporate interests. It's about—" The room plunged into darkness as Linda hit the emergency breaker. In the chaos that followed, Alexander lunged for Thomas, knocking the detonator from his hand. Linda found the manual release controls by feel, following the patterns Sarah's mother had documented so carefully. 2 minutes. The sound of heavy locks disengaging echoed through the building. Above them, they could hear shouts as the rescue teams accessed the secure wing. Thomas struggled in Alexander's grip, but years of corporate combat had given Alexander strength he didn't know he possessed. 1 minute! Linda's voice cut through the darkness. "It's done, the wing is open. They're getting the last patients out now." The emergency lights flickered back on, revealing Thomas pinned beneath Alexander, the detonator crushed beneath Linda's foot. On their earpieces, they could hear the evacuation teams confirming that the final patients were clear of the building. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. Agent Torres's voice crackled through the comm system. "All facilities reported clear. I repeat, all patients have been evacuated." Thomas slumped in defeat as FBI agents poured into the maintenance room. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Alexander one last time. "You have no idea what you've done. The people behind this, they'll never stop." "Maybe not," Alexander replied. "But thanks to Sarah's mother and mine, we know who they are, and we'll be ready." The fail-safe protocols activated with a series of distant thuds, but the buildings were empty. Their desperate plan to destroy evidence had failed. And in the FBI command center, Sarah continued to unlock the encrypted files that would expose not just Protocol Zero, but an entire network of secret experimentation that spanned continents. The truth, once buried in shadow, was finally emerging into the light. The aftermath of the facility evacuations sent shockwaves through the medical and pharmaceutical communities. As dawn broke over the city, news helicopters circled the buildings while FBI teams continued gathering evidence. Inside the command center, Sarah's decryption work had revealed an even more disturbing truth. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a complex diagram on her screen. "Mom found connections between Protocol Zero and research programs in 12 different countries. It's like a web, with each facility working on different aspects of the same project." The geneticist who had been analyzing the patient data nodded grimly. They compartmentalized the research. Each facility only saw their piece of the puzzle. But when you put it all together, you get a complete blueprint for genetic manipulation on a global scale, Alexander finished. He had been studying his mother's final notes, seeing them in a new light. That's what she discovered, not just the experiments at Evergreen, but the entire network. Agent Torres hung up her phone, her expression serious. "We've got confirmation from Interpol. They're moving on facilities in Europe and Asia, but we've got another problem. The board members of New Dawn's parent company are all convening an emergency meeting. They're going to try to contain it," Linda said. "Distance themselves from New Dawn, make it look like a rogue operation." Alexander shook his head. "No, they're not just containing it. They're activating contingency plans. Sarah, can you pull up the financial records your mother tracked?" The screens filled with transaction data, complex flows of money through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts. But now, they could see the pattern. Every time one operation was compromised, funds would be quickly rerouted to establish new facilities under different names. "They're like a hydra," Sarah observed. "Cut off one head, 2 more grow back." "Not this time," Alexander said firmly. "Because your mother didn't just document their current operations. She found their template, the exact method they used to set up new facilities. And more importantly, she found their money," Linda finished, understanding dawning on her face. "All those transactions she tracked, the patterns she documented. She wasn't just following where the money went. She was finding where it came from, Sarah said proudly. Mom always said follow the money back, not forward. That's how you find who's really in charge. Agent Torres was already mobilizing teams. We need to move fast. Once they realize we have their financial blueprint, they'll try to burn everything down, metaphorically and literally. The screens suddenly lit up with alerts. Around the world, transactions were being initiated. Massive transfers of funds through seemingly unrelated accounts. The Hydra was trying to save itself. They're moving the money, an analyst called out, billions being transferred to new accounts. But Sarah was smiling. No, they're not. Look closer. Everyone leaned in to study the transaction data. The money was moving, but not in the usual pattern. Instead of dispersing into hundreds of smaller accounts, it was being funneled through specific channels that Sarah's mother had identified and documented. She created a trap, Alexander realized. All those transactions they thought were secure. She found their weakness. When they try to move the money, it all leads to accounts we can trace, Agent Torres finished. Accounts that are now being monitored by financial authorities in every major country. Linda's phone buzzed with updates from her network. It's not just the money. Healthcare workers around the world are coming forward, reporting suspicious research programs. The pattern your mother documented, Sarah, it's helping people recognize the signs. The command center erupted with activity as reports flooded in, facilities being discovered, research programs being exposed, and most importantly, patients being saved from becoming unwitting test subjects. But in the midst of the chaos, Alexander noticed Sarah had gone quiet, staring at a photograph on her screen. It showed her mother and his, sitting together in the evergreen garden, surrounded by butterflies. They knew, didn't they? She said softly. They knew what would happen when they started gathering evidence. Alexander put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Yes, they did. And they did it anyway because they understood something important. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting the biggest battle, it's in starting the smallest change. Like a butterfly flapping its wings. Creating a storm that changes everything, Sarah finished, touching her mother's locket. Mom used to say that evil depends on shadows to survive. All we have to do is turn on the lights. Around them, the evidence continued to pour in. The Hydra wasn't just being attacked, it was being systematically dismantled, its very foundations exposed to the light. And as the sun rose over the city, Alexander realized that this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about fulfilling a promise made by two remarkable women who had dared to stand up against impossible odds. The butterfly effect they had set in motion was about to change the world. In the days that followed, the full impact of Sarah's mother's meticulous documentation began to emerge. The FBI command center had transformed into an international coordination hub, with screens displaying news coverage from around the world. Each hour brought new revelations, new arrests, new facilities discovered. Alexander stood before the evidence wall, now expanded to cover an entire room. Red strings connected photos, documents, and timeline entries, creating a visual representation of decades of systematic manipulation. But among the complex web of conspiracy, he kept coming back to one simple photograph. His mother and Sarah's, the two women who had set everything in motion. The board meeting's starting, Linda announced, rushing into the room. All the major players are there, thinking they're about to orchestrate their great escape. Agent Torres smiled grimly. Little do they know we have observers in place. Every word they say is being recorded, every decision documented. They're about to incriminate themselves completely. Sarah looked up from her computer where she was still decoding the final pieces of her mother's encrypted files. Mom had a name for people like them. She called them shadow dancers, always moving in the dark, thinking no one could see their true shape. But your mother saw them, Alexander said softly. Both our mothers did. They saw the pattern in the darkness. The main screen lit up with a secure feed from the board meeting. Executives in expensive suits sat around a polished table, their faces masks of confident control. But Alexander, who had once been part of that world, could see the fear beneath their composure. The New Dawn situation is unfortunate, the chairman was saying, but containable. Our legal teams are prepared to characterize it as a rogue operation, unauthorized experiments by misguided employees. I'm afraid that won't be possible, a new voice cut in. James Alexander's mother's attorney stepped into view. He had been quietly positioned as legal counsel for one of the board members, waiting for this moment. You see, we have rather comprehensive evidence of board-level involvement in Protocol Zero, including, I believe, this morning's attempts to transfer funds to your contingency accounts. The room erupted in chaos as federal agents entered from multiple doors. On other screens, similar scenes played out in boardrooms across the globe. The shadow dancers were finally being forced into the light, but even as the arrests continued, Alexander noticed something in Sarah's expression. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the look she got when putting pieces together. "There's something in these last files," she said slowly. "Mom didn't just document what they did. She found their research, their real research, the genetic modifications, the biological triggers. I think she found a way to reverse them." The geneticist hurried over, studying the data on Sarah's screen. "She's right. These are gene therapy protocols designed to neutralize the artificial modifications. Your mother wasn't just exposing them, she was trying to save their victims." Linda's phone buzzed with yet another update. "The Roses just called. They're safe, and they've been helping other families connect with loved ones who were in the facilities. People are coming forward, sharing their stories. The silence is breaking." Alexander thought of all the patients who had been saved from the facilities, and all those who might still be out there unaware of what had been done to them. How many people could be affected? "Thousands, potentially," the geneticist answered. "But with these protocols we can help them. It will take time, but we can undo what was done." "Time we now have," Agent Torres added, "thanks to your mother's work. The funding that was seized from those accounts, it's being redirected to establish treatment programs for the victims." Sarah touched her mother's locket, which now held not just a photograph, but a symbol of hope. "Mom used to say that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about making sure it can never be broken the same way again." On the screens around them, the story continued to unfold. News channels reported on the arrests, the exposed facilities, the global network of corruption being dismantled. But more importantly, they reported on the courage of two women who had dared to stand against a system that seemed invincible. "We should tell their story," Linda suggested softly. "Not just the conspiracy they exposed, but who they were, what they fought for." Alexander nodded, watching as Sarah began writing in a fresh notebook, not to document corruption this time, but to preserve the memory of two extraordinary women who had changed the world. "They were more than whistleblowers," Sarah said as she wrote. "They were lights in the darkness, and now, because of them, the shadows can never grow back." Outside the command center windows, butterflies danced in the morning sun, their wings catching the light like tiny beacons of hope. The world was changing, one truth at a time, just as Sarah's mother had predicted. And somewhere, Alexander knew two brave women were smiling. 1 month after the fall of New Dawn, Alexander stood in the renovated lobby of the Sterling Medical Foundation. The building had been transformed, its once cold corporate aesthetic replaced with warm colors and living plants. Most striking was the new centerpiece, a wall-length mural of butterflies, each one representing a patient who had been saved from the Protocol Zero facilities. Sarah sat cross-legged on a comfortable chair nearby, helping a young patient fill out forms for the Foundation's new treatment program. The girl had been one of many children affected by the genetic modifications, but thanks to Sarah's mother's reversal protocols, she was already showing signs of recovery. "It's like waking up from a long dream," the girl explained, her eyes bright with renewed energy. "Everything feels clearer now." Linda entered through the main doors carrying a stack of newspapers. The headlines told the ongoing story. Global healthcare reform in wake of Protocol Zero scandal. New oversight committees established. Whistleblower protection laws strengthened. "The Roses send their love," she announced, setting down the papers. They're busy helping set up support groups for families affected by the experiments. Mrs. Rose says her kitchen has never been so full of people sharing stories and finding hope. Alexander smiled, remembering the humble home that had given him shelter when he needed it most. The Roses had refused any formal recognition for their role in protecting Sarah and helping expose the truth, insisting that opening their home to those in need was reward enough. The genetic therapy programs are showing remarkable success, the lead researcher reported, approaching with a tablet full of data. Your mother's protocols were brilliant, Sarah. She didn't just find a way to reverse the modifications, she created a method to prevent similar manipulations from ever working again. Sarah beamed with pride, touching the locket that still hung around her neck. Inside, along with her mother's photo, she now kept a small butterfly charm, a gift from Alexander to match the Foundation's new symbol of transformation and hope. The Foundation itself had undergone a complete restructuring. Alexander had insisted on full transparency, establishing an oversight board that included medical ethicists, patient advocates, and family representatives. Every research proposal, every trial protocol, every funding decision was now subject to rigorous ethical review. We just received confirmation from the International Task Force, Linda added, checking her phone. 3 more facilities were discovered in Southeast Asia, but this time, local healthcare workers recognized the signs. No patients were harmed. They caught it in the planning stages. Mum would have loved that, Sarah said softly. She always said the best victory isn't stopping something bad from happening once, it's preventing it from happening again. Alexander nodded, thinking of his own mother's final letter. She had seen this moment coming, not just the exposure of Protocol Zero, but the opportunity to rebuild something better from its ashes. A group of medical students entered the lobby, here for the Foundation's new ethical research training program. Among them was the young accountant, who had first helped Alexander by revealing the suspicious meetings. He had since become a key witness in the ongoing investigations and was now retraining to become a patient advocate. You know what still amazes me? Linda mused, watching the students settle in for their orientation. How 2 women working independently managed to create such a perfect blueprint for exposing the truth. Every document, every connection, every fail-safe, they thought of everything. Not independently, Alexander corrected gently. They worked together even if they didn't know how their pieces would eventually fit. Like the butterflies Mom loved so much. Separate wings working in perfect harmony to create something powerful. Sarah looked up from her work with the young patient. They knew the truth would come out eventually. They just had to make sure all the pieces were there when the right moment came. The Foundation's new mission statement hung prominently on the wall. Healing with honor, advancing with ethics, inspired by the courage of those who dared to speak. Below it, a simpler phrase captured the heart of their work. In memory of those who lit the way. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light on the butterfly mural, Alexander watched Sarah helping more patients navigate their way to healing. She had her mother's strength, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to doing what was right no matter the cost. The Foundation was more than just a medical research institution now. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of truth, and a living memorial to 2 extraordinary women who had dared to challenge the darkness. Their legacy lived on in every patient helped, every truth revealed, every life transformed. And somewhere, in the gentle flutter of butterfly wings, their spirit soared on. 1 year to the day after Alexander had found himself on those cold train tracks, he stood in the Foundation's butterfly garden. The space had been created in honor of both mothers, a peaceful sanctuary where healing could begin. Sarah sat on a nearby bench, writing in her journal as butterflies danced around the flowering plants. I found something interesting in Mum's last files, she said, looking up from her writing. A letter she wrote to me, dated just before everything changed. She knew about you, about your mother. She had a feeling your paths would cross with mine someday. Alexander settled beside her on the bench. What did she say? Sarah opened her mother's locket, pulling out a carefully folded piece of paper. She wrote that sometimes the universe has a way of bringing together the right people at the right moment, that when you're fighting for truth, you never know who your allies might be. Linda approached, carrying a tablet with the latest data from their global monitoring network. The system they had created to track suspicious medical research patterns was working perfectly, preventing any new Protocol Zero-type operations from taking root. The last of the board members was sentenced today, she reported. Catherine provided enough evidence to ensure none of them will ever work in medicine or pharmaceuticals again. Alexander thought of his ex-wife, now serving her own sentence, but also working with prosecutors to expose other corporate corruption. Even in the end, she had found a way to choose truth over power. The Roses called, Linda continued, smiling. They're expanding their support network. More homes are opening their doors to families affected by the trials. People helping people, just like they've always done. Sarah closed her journal, watching a particularly bright butterfly land on a nearby flower. Mum used to say that change doesn't always come from big gestures. Sometimes it's the small acts of kindness that create the biggest waves. The garden had become a symbol of that philosophy. Here, patients recovering from the genetic modifications could find peace. Families reunited after years of separation could rebuild their bonds, and people who had lost hope could find it again, nurtured by the same spirit of compassion that had driven two remarkable women to stand against injustice. I've been thinking about that night on the tracks, Alexander said quietly. How close? I came to giving up. If you hadn't been there, Sarah. I was there because Mom made sure I would be, she replied simply. She taught me to watch for people in pain, to never walk away when someone needs help, just like your mom taught you, to fight for what's right even when it seems impossible. Linda sat with them, sharing in the peaceful moment. You know what amazes me most? How their work continues to grow. Every day, more healthcare workers learn to spot the warning signs. More researchers choose ethics over profit. More people find the courage to speak up. Like ripples in a pond, Sarah nodded, or butterflies creating storms. The foundation had become more than they could have imagined. Beyond treating the victims of Protocol Zero, it had established new standards for medical research ethics, created support networks for whistleblowers, and funded education programs to ensure the next generation of medical professionals would never forget the lessons learned. Alexander reached into his pocket, pulling out a small package. I have something for you, Sarah. We found it in my mother's safety deposit box. It was meant for your mum, but he handed her the carefully wrapped item. Sarah opened it slowly, revealing a beautiful silver butterfly pendant. A note fell out. For my fellow truth seeker, may your wings never tire. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she held the pendant. They never met in person, did they? But they knew each other through their work, their courage. They knew each other through their hope for a better future, Alexander corrected gently. A future they trusted us to build. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the garden, they sat together in comfortable silence. The butterfly mural on the foundation's wall caught the fading rays, making the wings seem to flutter with life. Each butterfly represented a life saved, a truth revealed, a small victory in the ongoing fight for justice. The garden would continue to grow, just as the legacy of two brave women would continue to inspire. And in the gentle flutter of butterfly wings, their story lived on, a testament to the power of truth, the strength of compassion, and the enduring impact of those who dare to stand against darkness. Sarah opened her journal to a fresh page, beginning to write their story anew. Not just the tale of Protocol Zero and its exposure, but the deeper truth about how small acts of courage can change the world. How two women, armed with nothing but conviction and hope, had started a movement that would ensure such darkness could never again take root. And as butterflies danced around them in the fading light, Alexander knew that this wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, a new chapter in a story that would continue to inspire generations to come. 2 years after the exposure of Protocol Zero, the Sterling Medical Foundation had become a global center for ethical medical research and patient advocacy. On this particular morning, Alexander stood at the podium in the Foundation's main conference hall, addressing a room full of international healthcare representatives. "The butterfly effect isn't just a theory," he began, gesturing to the now famous mural behind him. "It's a reminder that the smallest actions can create profound change. 2 years ago, 2 remarkable women proved this when they chose to stand up against what seemed like an invincible system." The audience included faces both familiar and new. The Roses sat in the front row, their gentle smiles encouraging as always. Linda, now the Foundation's Director of Patient Advocacy, sat beside them, her notebook filled with updates from their global monitoring network. "Today, we're not just celebrating the exposure of one corrupt operation," Alexander continued. "We're celebrating every person who has since found the courage to speak up, every healthcare worker who has chosen ethics over expedience, every researcher who has committed to putting patients before profits." Sarah, who had grown into a poised young woman, stepped up to join him at the podium. She had become the Foundation's youngest board member, bringing her unique perspective to their mission of protection and healing. "My mother and Mrs. Sterling never wanted recognition," she addressed the crowd. "They didn't do what they did for fame or reward. They did it because they understood something fundamental, that the true measure of medical advancement isn't in profits or patents, but in how we protect the most vulnerable among us." The screens behind them displayed statistics that told a powerful story. Hundreds of potentially dangerous research programs identified and stopped before they could harm patients, thousands of people successfully treated for unauthorized genetic modifications, and a new global standard for medical research ethics that was transforming the industry. James, who had survived his encounter with New Dawn's security teams and now served as the Foundation's legal counsel, stood to present the next phase of their work. "We're expanding our whistleblower protection program," he announced. "The Sarah and Eleanor Fund, named in honor of our inspirations, will provide support and security for healthcare workers who step forward to expose unethical practices." The announcement was met with applause, but for Alexander, the most powerful response was the quiet tears he saw in the eyes of former Protocol Zero patients and their families. People who had once been victims were now advocates, their stories helping to ensure that such exploitation could never happen again. Linda stepped forward to share updates from their global monitoring network. "In the past year alone, we've identified and prevented 37 attempts to establish unauthorized genetic research programs. But more importantly, we've seen a fundamental shift in how the medical community responds to ethical concerns." She gestured to a group of young medical students in the audience, the first graduating class from the Foundation's new ethical research program. These future leaders understand that true medical advancement must be built on a foundation of compassion, transparency, and respect for human dignity. As the presentation continued, Alexander noticed Sarah touching her mother's locket, a gesture that had become familiar over the years. Inside, she still kept the butterfly pendant his mother had left for her mum, a symbol of the unexpected connections that had brought them all together. The Foundation's work had expanded far beyond their original mission of exposing Protocol Zero. They had created a global network of advocacy centers, research facilities, and support systems. But more than that, they had sparked a movement, a fundamental change in how the medical community approached research and patient care. "My mother used to say that the hardest part of creating change isn't in exposing what's wrong," Sarah shared with the audience. "It's in building something better to take its place. That's what we're doing here, all of us together, building a future where medical advancement serves humanity, not the other way around." As she spoke, butterflies from the garden outside danced past the conference hall's windows, their wings catching the morning light. It was a reminder of how far they had come and of the 2 women whose courage had made it all possible. The Foundation had become more than a memorial to their sacrifice. It was a living testament to their vision of what medical research could be. Every day, in ways both large and small, their legacy continued to grow and transform, touching lives across the globe. And in the gentle flutter of butterfly wings, their spirit of hope and determination lived on, inspiring new generations to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. After the conference, Alexander and Sarah walked through the butterfly garden, now expanded to cover a significant portion of the foundation's grounds. The space had become a sanctuary, not just for patients and families, but for anyone seeking a moment of peace and reflection. "I found something else in Mom's files," Sarah said, leading him to a quiet corner of the garden. "Something she wrote about your mother, about the day they first met at Evergreen." She pulled out a carefully preserved page from her journal. "Mom wrote that when she first shared her suspicions about the unauthorized treatments, she was terrified. But your mother just looked at her and said, 'Sometimes the scariest moment is right before you do the right thing.'" Alexander smiled, hearing his mother's voice in those words. "That sounds like her. She always knew exactly what to say to give people courage." They sat on a bench dedicated to the memory of both women, watching as butterflies danced among the flowers. The garden had been designed to attract specific species, creating a living rainbow of wings that seemed to embody the spirit of transformation and hope. Linda joined them, carrying fresh data from their global monitoring system. "The ripple effects are still spreading," she reported. "3 more countries have adopted our ethical research guidelines. The protocol your mother's developed for identifying suspicious patterns has become the global standard." "And Catherine?" Sarah asked softly. She had never stopped wondering about the woman who had been part of causing so much pain. "Still cooperating," Linda confirmed. "Her testimony has helped expose 5 more attempts to establish unauthorized research programs. She'll never be free, but she's found a way to contribute to making things right." Alexander thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From that cold night on the train tracks to this peaceful garden, every step had been guided by the courage and foresight of 2 extraordinary women who had dared to stand against corruption. "The Roses called earlier," Sarah mentioned, smiling. "Their support network has expanded to 20 countries now. Mrs. Rose says she's baking more cookies than ever." That simple detail, Mrs. Rose's cookies bringing comfort to families healing from trauma, perfectly embodied how small acts of kindness could help rebuild shattered lives. The Roses had never sought recognition for their role in protecting Sarah and helping expose the truth, but their impact continued to grow through the lives they touched. "You know what I realized?" Alexander said, watching a particularly vibrant butterfly land nearby. "That night you found me on the tracks, it wasn't just chance. Your mother had taught you to watch for people in need, just as my mother had taught me the importance of standing up for what's right. They were still helping people even then through us." Sarah nodded, touching her locket. "Mom wrote about that too. She said that the true measure of our actions isn't in what we achieve ourselves, but in what we inspire others to do." The foundation had become living proof of that philosophy. Every day people came together here, patients finding healing, researchers committed to ethical advancement, advocates working to protect the vulnerable. The butterfly effect their mothers had started continued to create positive change across the globe. James appeared on the garden path carrying a folder. "The last piece of the puzzle," he announced. "The International Court has approved the creation of a permanent oversight committee. The protocols your mothers developed will be used to monitor medical research worldwide." Linda smiled. "They would have loved that, not the recognition, but knowing that their work will protect people for generations to come." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the garden, Alexander and Sarah stood before the butterfly mural one last time. Each wing represented a life touched, a truth revealed, a small victory in the ongoing fight for justice and compassion in medical care. "There's one more thing Mom wrote," Sarah said, opening her journal to a final entry. She said that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or influence or even scientific advancement. It's the moment when one person looks at something wrong and decides to make it right. Alexander thought of that cold night on the train tracks when a young girl's courage had given him a second chance. He thought of 2 women who had faced impossible odds with nothing but truth and determination as their weapons. And he thought of all the lives that had been transformed because they had dared to stand up for what was right. The butterfly garden would continue to grow, just as their mother's legacy would continue to inspire. In the gentle flutter of wings, in the courage of whistleblowers, in the commitment to ethical research, And in the countless acts of kindness that helped heal broken lives, their spirit lived on. And as the last light of day painted the sky in colors as vibrant as butterfly wings, Alexander and Sarah knew that this wasn't just an ending, it was a continuing beginning. A reminder that even the smallest acts of courage could create waves of change that would transform the world. 5 years to the day after Sarah had pulled Alexander from those train tracks, they stood together at the entrance of a brand new building. The Sarah and Eleanor Center for Medical Ethics stood as a testament to how far they had come, its modern architecture incorporating subtle butterfly motifs throughout the design. "Ready?" Sarah asked, holding the ceremonial ribbon. At 17, she had grown into a poised young woman, carrying her mother's strength and compassion with grace. Alexander nodded, looking at the gathered crowd. The Roses were there, of course, still helping others even in their retirement. Linda stood with James and Agent Torres, all of them now key figures in the global fight for ethical medical research. Former patients and their families filled the courtyard, many wearing butterfly pins that signified their role as advocates and mentors. "This center," Alexander began his address, "represents more than just a building. It represents a promise made by two extraordinary women who believed that medical advancement should serve humanity, not exploit it." Sarah continued, her voice clear and strong. "My mother and Mrs. Sterling showed us that true courage isn't about fighting the biggest battles. It's about taking that first step, speaking that first truth, extending that first helping hand." The center would serve multiple purposes: a training facility for medical ethics, a support hub for whistleblowers, a research institute dedicated to ethical advancement, and most importantly, a place where people could find help and hope. Linda stepped forward to share the latest statistics. The monitoring system created from Sarah's mother's protocols had prevented hundreds of potentially dangerous research programs from taking root. The support network inspired by the Roses had expanded to help thousands of families. The ethical guidelines developed from both mothers' documentation had become the global standard. But perhaps the most important number, Linda said, smiling, is one. It just takes one person willing to stand up for what's right, one voice willing to speak the truth, one small action that can change everything. As if on cue, butterflies from the garden began to dance around the courtyard, their wings catching the sunlight. The crowd watched in wonder as the delicate creatures created patterns of light and shadow, a living reminder of the transformative power of small actions. James presented Sarah with a bound copy of both mothers' collected writings, now used as a core text in medical ethics programs worldwide. "Their words continue to inspire new generations," he said. "Their courage continues to light the way." The Roses, who had become like grandparents to Sarah, stepped forward to cut the ribbon with her. Mrs. Rose's eyes sparkled with tears of joy as she embraced the young woman who had once shown up at her door with a troubled stranger in tow. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered to Sarah. "Both your mothers would be proud of all you've accomplished." Alexander watched the scene, thinking of that desperate night when he had lost all hope. How could he have known that his salvation would come in the form of a young girl carrying her mother's courage and wisdom? How could he have imagined that his own mother's final act of defiance would help create such profound change? The center stood as a beacon of hope, its butterfly-inspired architecture catching the light like wings about to take flight. Inside, new generations would learn the importance of ethical research, the power of speaking truth, and the impact that one person's courage could have on the world. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah opened her locket, now containing photos of both mothers. "They never got to see this," she said softly, "but somehow I think they knew. They knew that if they just lit the first spark, others would carry the flame forward." Alexander nodded, understanding perfectly. Their mothers had created more. Far than just evidence, they had created a legacy of courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. A legacy that continued to transform lives and inspire change across the globe. In the gentle flutter of butterfly wings, their spirit lived on, reminding everyone that the greatest changes often start with the smallest acts of courage. The sun was setting on the day of the center's opening, casting long shadows across the butterfly garden. Alexander and Sarah sat on their favorite bench, watching as the last visitors explored the new facility. The day had been filled with moments of triumph and reflection, but now, in the quiet of evening, they could finally process everything that had led to this moment. "I found one last recording," Sarah said, pulling out her tablet. "It was hidden in Mom's final encrypted files. I think she meant for us to find it today." With trembling fingers, she pressed play. Her mother's voice, strong and clear, filled the peaceful garden. "To whoever finds this recording, if you're listening, then the truth has finally come to light. But more importantly, it means that someone had the courage to carry forward what Eleanor and I started. We knew we might not see the end of this journey, but we believed in the power of truth to find its way into the light." Alexander's eyes filled with tears as a second voice joined the recording, his mother's voice, preserved in a moment of quiet strength. "We're leaving these breadcrumbs not just to expose wrongdoing, but to show others that change is possible. That one person's stand for truth can inspire others to find their own courage. Sarah, Alexander, if you're listening to this, know that we are so proud of you both." Sarah's mother's voice returned. "The butterfly effect isn't just about how small actions create big changes. It's about transformation, how something fragile and beautiful can emerge from darkness and struggle. That's what we hope our work will create, not just an end to corruption, but a beginning of something better." As the recording ended, a group of butterflies danced past them, their wings catching the last rays of sunlight. The sight reminded Alexander of something his mother used to say: "Hope is like a butterfly. It can appear delicate, but it has the strength to cross oceans." Linda approached with the day's final reports. The center's opening had already inspired new whistleblowers to come forward, new researchers to commit to ethical practices, new advocates to join their cause. The butterfly effect continued to spread, creating waves of positive change across the globe. "You know what I've realized?" Sarah said, watching the butterflies settle in for the evening. "They never really left us. Every time someone finds the courage to speak up, every time someone chooses to help instead of harm, every time someone takes that first step toward making things right, that's them, still showing us the way." Alexander nodded, understanding perfectly. Their mothers had created more than just a movement or a legacy. They had created a template for courage, a reminder that the most powerful changes often start with the smallest acts of bravery. The new center stood as a testament to that truth, its butterfly-inspired architecture catching the final light of day like wings poised for flight. Inside, future generations would learn not just about medical ethics and patient advocacy, but about the profound impact that individual courage could have on the world. As darkness fell and the garden's soft lights came on, illuminating the Amauba paths like stars fallen to earth, Alexander and Sarah stood for one last look at what their mother's courage had built. The Sarah and Eleanor Center would stand as a beacon of hope and transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a path toward light. "They were right, you know," Sarah said softly, touching her mother's locket. "About everything. About how truth finds its way into the light, about how small acts of courage can transform the world, about how love and determination can overcome even the greatest obstacles." Alexander smiled, watching the last butterfly of the evening settle onto a flower. Yes, they were. And through this place, through the lives we touch and the changes we create, their wisdom and courage will continue to transform the world, one small act of bravery at a time. In the gentle evening breeze, the butterfly garden seemed to whisper with the collected hopes and dreams of all those who had been part of this journey. And in that whisper, in the soft flutter of wings and the quiet strength of truth, the spirit of two remarkable women lived on, forever, inspiring others to spread their own wings and take flight toward justice and compassion.